Right.
So then dropping right in. So I kind of saw you on Instagram because the Alembic, where Michael Taft and many other teachers teach, has also an Instagram account. And I saw men's work with Alex Olshonsky. And I thought, hey, who is this guy? Because I myself also do, I won't call it exactly men's work, but it actually is men's work. I just only recently discovered that the men's group that I host is men's work, of course. And so I thought, I'm going to reach out to you. And you're this interesting person. I checked out your website. You have a podcast. You just said you don't do it anymore, but
hopefully we'll bring it back
yeah.
soon. Yeah.
And just so I'll just read a little bit from what I read on your website. You're a father, executive coach, somatic therapist, writer, social entrepreneur, founder of Sons of Now, which is a men's group for the meta-modern men, and the co-founder of Natura Care, if I pronounce it correctly, a nonprofit harnessing psychedelics for healing. And you also write Deep Fix, a popular Substack newsletter, and your essays have appeared in a wide range of publications. Now, there's much more to you than that little blurb. What would you add at this point to, who is Alex Olshonsky?
Yeah, that's, well, I guess it's funny kind of hearing your own about page read back to you. I mean, that covers a lot of the brass tacks of how I spend my time these days. I mean, I would think the thing though that is most present in my life now is that I'm a father. I'm a relatively new dad. I have a 2-year-old. My boy's about to be 2 in 2 weeks. And so that's the thing that, I'm still in the midst of just that major identity shift and noticing how the center of gravity is moving within me and what that means for my work and how I relate to the world. And so that's the thing I think that probably can't be captured in just a short little bio. And other than that, I think, the just spiritual life and the dharma is super important to me. And that also can't be conveyed in a short little quip.
Yeah. So, and I'm also a fellow dad, around the same duration of time. So my girl is 2 years old and two and a half. And we just had an addition of a little boy. About being a father, what is for you, would you say, something that you've noticed about it that you couldn't imagine beforehand, maybe?
There's a couple of things, but the thing that is most salient is a trust in life itself that I don't think I had prior to having a child. I also, prior to conceiving and prior to us even like opening up the prayer of becoming parents and getting pregnant, I had a lot of anxieties and insecurities about like having a healthy child. I wasn't very educated on what birth is like. And I just, I had that relates to some conditioning of my own that I carry. But yeah, I was really concerned that oh my God, like what is my child? We didn't know the gender, but it's like, is he going to be healthy? And what would happen if he's not? And then just watching my wife birth him and helping catch him as he came out, and then just seeing as he's just grown at every stage. And we've had our normal stumbles like all parents do. I mean, you know how it goes. Congrats, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is just given me a felt sense of just like life takes care of itself. And there's just intelligence that's just far deeper than anything we can imagine that, knows how to grow and evolve and develop. And that I really didn't expect. And so it really settled something like deep in my somatic psyche. So I wasn't expecting that. And then, you've got 2, right? And so that's a separate crossing, a separate Rubicon. But I think there's an element of just, there is no longer any chill, it feels like. I mean, or the moments in which you get chill are like, oh, it's a real reprieve, but you can't really prepare for that. And it's funny how like all my friends who were parents are just like, yeah, have kids. And then like you cross over the other side and you reach out and you're like, hey, I'm kind of like at my wit's end and burnt out. And they're like, yeah, welcome. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can't. And so everyone hears this, how it's, wonderful and super demanding, but that I just don't think can be anticipated until you're in it.
Yeah.
But for me, it hasn't it's really felt very natural. And like that's been another thing that I've noticed is you just adapt, you find a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm. Yeah.
What about for you?
So, um, the question, I guess, was what I did I not expect. Um, I guess I find it a bit difficult to answer that question myself. But for me, I can say you mentioned a little bit some conditioning. I have a fair bit of conditioning myself. I think I was very afraid of, or maybe to put it differently, it's become clear that the way I see myself as a dad subconsciously is just exactly what I always have thought about my own father.
Mm-hmm.
And the strange thing for me is that most of my youth I was raised by my stepfather, who was slightly sociopathic, alcoholic, and also a little bit criminal.
Oh,
It was,
geez.
and but the thing is, yeah, but he was not my dad, and there was this weird thing in me that when more in the beginning with Izzy, my daughter, I had this weird psychological position of I'm not her father, and I think it's just a straight projection from my old uh, constellation, let's say. So
Wow.
it was, yeah, quite, but yeah, it's been really difficult, honestly, but also beautiful. But yeah, it's fucking hard sometimes. Yeah,
It's super hard. Yeah, I mean, I would say that for me, it has felt more natural, but for my partner, and it's been beautiful for her too, but also just, she had a rough postpartum and witnessing her go through that. And, um, it's been very humbling just to see, and just to see especially what mothers go through and the transformation
yeah,
of their body. And, and so it's just, we were like these like very fit, yogis kind of before having a kid. And now it's like, it's different. It definitely is different.
yeah,
And I think I wouldn't want to scare anyone though, because I do think that it's a level of meaning that just you can't you can't replicate. And
yeah,
and for me, like for me, there is a real deeper sense of like, now I feel connected to this stream of life. Like we've all been raised by parents and they were just doing their best, like we were, for the most part, of course.
yeah,
And so it's like becoming part of this lineage. And I really love like being like going out in town and just, our boy's really cute and just people light up around you see a lot of the innate goodness of humanity from it. And so I do feel like it's getting an experience that if you don't have it, like you're kind of, well, again, I want to be careful about my words here, but it's not that you're missing a fundamental aspect of life, but I think for me, I would say I would be missing a fundamental aspect of life. And yeah, that has surprised me. Um,
hmm. Yeah, yeah. I resonate. It's a deep honor to do this, to be able to do this. I'm not sure those were not your words, but somehow that I feel that's in there as well. Would you say that you also resonate with that?
I love that. Yeah, it is a deep honor. It's sacred too. And I think for me, I'm a writer, and for many years, like being a writer was sort of like the centerpiece of my identity. I was really trying to make it until I kind of had to let go of some of those like ambitions, which were coming from, I think lesser uh, status driven elements and a lot of earnest creativity. But as a writer, I was like, really tracking culture and really big into sense making and integral metamodernism, which I think we have some shared overlap there, nonviolent communication, and like really watching what I felt like was the world unraveling very clearly and feeling like I had a very important role to play in that. Like speaking and writing about it. And then since becoming a father, I've realized like, oh, like it's just been so clarified. Like, no, like this is it. Raise a healthy son, raise a mature, wise, loving, powerful man. Do your
Yeah,
best because a lot of it's out of your control, but like it feels like that's the way to actually impact things.
yeah,
And so I wasn't expecting that either. And because now looking back in hindsight, some of those other things that I thought were maybe like sacred and honorable feel pretty silly. And so and I've heard that before, like you become a parent and then your past sort of interest and ambitions are just like, they feel trivial. They feel immature.
mhm, yeah, yeah. I find that beautiful. just before kind of the official recording, I mentioned Eckhart Tolle, and I want to make a link to that later. But he also says sometimes when you see your own disease or something like that, you see that from your healthy part. And I guess what I'm saying is that you seeing that as trivial or immature, as that comes from a very mature place, I feel.
Let's hope. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, talk to me in a couple of years, but
Yeah.
I would hope so. It
Yeah.
does feel like a growing up, and and I'm a big fan of the integral framework around like waking up, cleaning up, growing up, showing up, opening up. And I think when it comes to sort of growing up and showing up, the parenting is like a real powerful test. Like you're sort of
Yeah.
forced to. And then the other thing that you mentioned is like just how and I'm trained. I have a lot of training in somatic psychology and whatnot, and so I've known just how important our parents are as far as the impact they make on one's life. But then becoming a father, you really see, because like you pointed out, like, oh, like here's my dad and here's my mom, and it's actually given me a ton of appreciation for them. Um, and also seeing the ways in which I show up and how I might want to do things differently and how I might want to carry on some of the things that they did, or even see some things that they did better than I feel like I'm able to do. And so you really see when you're shaping an unconditioned, just pure joyous being and you're starting to condition them, like you see how impactful that is. Like you have a big role in this being's development.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And of course, it's interesting for me to realize you're raising a son. You just said, you're raising a man actually. And one of the, first curiosities I had about you is your men's work. Um, can you just say a little bit about how did you stumble upon men's work? Because it's not that obvious for me. Can you say a little bit about how that came to be?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I'm also curious, like maybe I wonder how much like proper men's work is happening in the Netherlands. It's definitely a global movement, but I think in US and particularly in California, it has its thing. But I was never expecting to do men's work. My whole entryway into the spiritual path and the life that I live now was recovery, and so I'm in a recovering from a polysubstance addiction that nearly killed me, and so that really broke me open, and I landed in AA in those early days, and I was at that time married to my college sweetheart, although that marriage was like really beginning to unravel as a result of the wake of my addiction. And um, being in co-ed AA meetings at that time was very distracting for me. I
Yeah.
was, like my mind kept like looking towards other women and trying to make myself bigger, and I was really concerned with how I was showing up in those groups. And then I started going to stags meeting, as they're called in AA, or just men's meetings in AA. And
Mhm.
those guys, like, one, they so took me under their wing and just like showed me what to do. And like, cause I, at this point, like really was like starting over. I didn't really know how to live. Um, but that being in that space, a men's only space, like I just felt so much more relaxed, and I didn't feel like I needed to perform. I felt like I could be real. I felt like we were being real. And that was my first taste of it. And then, I started doing more like proper men's work, like with the Mankind Project, other local groups, psychedelic men's work. And then I met my mentor, Ben Gorski, who is he runs the ARCA Brotherhood, which is one of the world's sort of like largest international men's groups. And I joined his group for several years, sort of trained under him, receive ongoing sort of supervision and mentorship from him. And that was like my first taste of what I felt like men's work that was really blending modalities. Like it was spiritual oriented, yet like practical and powerful, emotionally centric, trauma aware, yet not just sort of like collapsing into the victim mentality. And it was also like oriented towards like making things happen, getting things done, not shying away from building the art and businesses that you might dream of. And I felt like I, really had found something super powerful and there were several moments along the way, along my journey with men's work, where things that were said by men in those spaces, in particular, something that happened that my mentor once said to me in a men's group, like literally like changed the course of my life. And it was like, there, one moment in particular where basically he said something to the tune of like, because at this point I was still working in tech. I was a Silicon Valley guy, and yet sort of moonlighting with writing and coaching on the side and spiritual life. And he was like, you know what you want to do, you're good at it, and yet you're just delaying, and you're not doing it because you're scared. And, or like you might have even been stronger. It might have even been like you're a coward. I don't remember exactly what the exact phrasing was, but it was like, boom, it hit me super hard. And I think having spaces like that where you can get direct truth from someone that you know is actually committed to your own evolution and betterment, that is just such a powerful thing, and it's really rare. And we used to have that. We used to sit around the fire sort of like after the hunt, or after a war, and have that, counsel. And we don't have that in modern conditions. And so we have to sort of create these conditions where we simulate some of these great elements from the past. And so that for me, even though I think at the end of the day, just having men support each other and love each other, which is like so key, that element of sort of like fire, and truth is something that I think is central to men's work. And so we can and I think this might be a good segue into our conversation around like nonviolent communication and whatnot in men's work and the role there. But yeah, and then I mean, the last thing I'll say is that uh, throughout time, as like I grew and developed, I thought I saw that there was like even like another gap in the men's workspace, where there's a lot of these sort of like new age, neo-spiritual men's groups that are all about like divine masculinity, and in my opinion, like a lot of sort of spiritual materialism, or just like conceptual sort of masculinity that is excellent, and there's a real there. But then there's also sort of like hardcore, get money, build business, that sort of masculinity. Then there's this very like emotion centric, soft, like we're going to like go really slow and just support and love each other. And I felt like there was something that was missing, like a synthesis of all of these. And, as like as someone who's been really heavily influenced by metamodernism and integral meta theory, which essentially tries to integrate and weave the best from multiple modalities, ways of being, and uh, courses of history, I felt like I wanted to create a men's group that did that, and was spiritually centric, but grounded spirituality, like really about phenomenological awakening, actually having people have proper shifts, but then also pulling from, growing up, waking up, showing up, and like building things in the world, taking what's valuable from some of these more, I think, business or growth oriented men's orientations, without the just chasing validation and external status and money that is the shadow side of that. And so I was trying to create a synthesis and sort of attract guys like that and like me. And so thus far it's proven to be a good thesis, and it's been a really meaningful thing. And I feel really honored. Some of the groups that I lead have just very talented men, and men that I would join their programs in a heartbeat. And so I feel really fortunate to do this work. It doesn't feel like work, and some of these guys are people that I look up to very dearly. And I never expected to be doing men's work. Like, I can't stress how I actually had a lot of resistance to it, like for some of the reasons I mentioned. And so I guess sometimes though, that's when you're maybe doing something that's right.
Mm. That sounds like a really cool men's group that you have. Do you only do it in person, or do you do it also online, or what's the format?
Yeah, great question. And so we meet, I have a couple groups, they meet on Zoom. Some meet weekly for 2 hours. And so like that, you're spending 8 hours a month with guys. You get to go deep fast, and you really build strong bonds. And it's just remarkable. Like when you spend 2 hours a week with the same guys who are trying to make themselves better, trying to make you and the group better. It's like you really get to know someone very quickly. And so that's super powerful. And then we do retreats, usually like every 6 to 9 months, to help build the momentum there. And I run biweekly groups on Zoom. I do at the Alembic in-person men's work and workshops. That community is really just starting to get going, and a beautiful community is forming there of men, guys who are, as you know, in that world are really dharma centric. And then I also just host some like retreats that like people can attend, one-off retreats.
Yeah, that's really
So
cool.
it's a mixture. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just for people to know, like we're talking about the Alembic. What the hell is the Alembic? It's in San Francisco, right?
The Alembic's actually in Berkeley, and the
Berkeley.
Alembic is an interdisciplinary, it's an interdisciplinary like hub that hosts amazing events. It's really a sangha or community that hosts amazing events from meditation, psychedelics, somatics, like kirtan, spirituality. Like it's really sort of like the heartbeat of like the bleeding edge of consciousness studies, it feels like. And one of my meditation teachers, Michael Taft, who I know you're a fan of, he started it with Eric Davis, the sort of legendary psychedelic writer, and Katie Devaney, the neuroscientist and contemplative scientist. And it's just super cool place, beautiful home. And
yeah. Now I will. I hope to visit one day. I just don't know exactly. San Francisco, Berkeley, is that far away from each other, or?
It's like 20, 30 minutes. It's not far. It's maybe, you could take without traffic, you could get there in like 18 minutes, but with traffic, it could take 45 minutes. It's just across the bay. So there's San Francisco. So it's like, if you think of sort of like Manhattan and Brooklyn, like in New York City, it's like that, So it's like the bay. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Definitely, and of course, the hot topic that we are kind of approaching is NVC, because in our previous talk, you said something like, "I don't know if nonviolent communication is a good framework for men's work," and I think you have probably very good reason for that. And for people who are listening, they probably know that I host an NVC men's group, so I'm of course a big fan. But I'm very curious, like what's behind that for you? Like maybe first, what do you understand? Because it could be different understanding of NVC maybe. So how do you see NVC, and where do you see maybe the applications and maybe the pitfalls for men's work?
That's great. And it's a really interesting conversation. And just, I love NVC. I use it all the time in my work and in men's groups. So it's not to say that like it in men's groups is very useful. Well, maybe actually it'd be helpful to hear, because you run the Nonviolent Communication Men's Group, so it actually might be helpful to hear how you orient around it. I'm happy to share, how I use it, but considering it's your thing, maybe that could be a starting point.
Yeah. It's very simple. It's a non-judgmental space where we come and share our feelings and needs about topics, and that typically is very connecting. And I don't think so. I've been running the men's group for about 6 years now with my friend Olivier, and we both started it. And there's never been one session where we didn't go away thinking that was just amazing. We feel a big shift from just the connection between men, where my experience, and I think many men experience, that there's actually normally between men a bit of disconnect, a bit of almost the kind of animosity that we have carried for thousands of years, probably towards each other, because we are apparently biologically programmed to maybe be our each other's competitors. And we will typically have a theme. So now, one of the upcoming themes is global politics and enemy images. How do we stay human in a world of polarization? And it helps to connect. And we basically show up. We typically begin with a meditation. There will be a check-in. If it's a big group, we go into breakout rooms. If it's a small group, we stay in the main room. And we share and listen. And that's it. And I could say more, but I'll just let you take the mic.
Well, that's great. And I love that topic too. We just recently did a thing around, polarization. And it's, I think, important for men to be looking at like the state of the world and having conversations about it. And so Right. So yeah, like nonviolent communication is like the core of it, from my understanding, is like you state what happened objectively, like a security footage camera or recording, was able to witness what happened. You then use I statements to say how that made you feel. You then state your needs, and then you have an ask, right? That's like the proper sort of 4-step framework for like, and I use it all the time in coaching where, for instance, like when someone has a fight with their partner or an issue with one of their investors. And a lot of times people can be very quick to like go into judgment and blame. And so just be like, I hate it when you put the you leave the peanut butter on the silverware and put it in the dishwasher, because then it just creates this whole mess and it doesn't clean. And I've told you about this so many times, right? Like, when are you going to stop doing that? Right. That I would say is not skillful communication. It's very relatable. We've all been there. But I think what the invitation from nonviolent communication, which is really powerful, is to be like, hey, like I noticed there was peanut butter that still was stuck on the silverware. And when that happens, I feel really sad because I've already asked you about this a few times, and it makes me just feel like you don't value me, and I feel kind of worthless. And it maybe even it reminds me of, how I was raised or something like that. I'm extrapolating here, but,
Yeah.
and so, and when I feel like I'm being, you know, ignored in this way, it just, it makes me feel like I'm missing something core from our relationship. And so my ask would be like that you take this you take this into account next time, right? So that's like a typical nonviolent communication sort of use case. And for a lot of people, I think that is phenomenal, right? It's phenomenal. And in general, like right speech from Buddhism, which is the tradition I've spent the most time in, I think is a wonderful sort of like aspiration. Like, is it true? Is it kind? Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said now? Right? These are great things to always ask and try to live by. And so I just want to say that, right? So in a men's workspace, if you have a guy who is brand new to personal development and is at a, let's say, more sort of like entry level stage of just development themselves, and they come into a men's workspace and someone talks about that situation, or maybe let's just say something else, like they're talking about whether they want to quit their job, and this guy will, and this new person who's at like maybe a more entry level, just be like, it just sounds like you're just being really like scared. You got to just, I don't really understand. Like whenever I've had this problem, I've just jumped right into it and quit. And, I feel like you're wasting your time here. They could say something like that to that effect. And that wouldn't be necessarily skillful communication. It might be true for them, but I find this is like guys who are really new to the work and have never done therapy or any sort of like meditation or personal development, is they have a hard time like using the I statements or helping just support someone, or like learning the basics of like, hey, Hans, like that sounds tough. First of all, that you are in a job that you hate. Right. And so there is, I think, a very important like base level of just empathy, relating, and non-judgmentality that I think is important from nonviolent communication. However, it in a men's workspace and in general, it is absolutely a methodology that can be weaponized, and people can use it to constantly sort of like come back to their needs in a way that it sort of actually just reinforces a sense of sort of victimization and this idea that like your needs are always completely paramount, and that your needs and feelings are like objective truth, when in fact they're actually just your subjective experience and just how you feel about something. And when that sort of modality can be used like as sort of like a source of truth without understanding that it has its limitations, I think it can be um, quite harmful. And we see this in sort of like polyamory spaces. We see this in parts of like Bay Area therapy culture. I see this with some of my clients, and friends who are, spiritual practitioners who it's just like, oh, like my truth is this, and that's so important. And that's what, like, because this is my truth, I'm going to communicate it to you in a way that makes you feel, crappy for whatever the reason may be. And so that's like sort of, I'd say, one of the biggest risks, but also in a men's workspace, in the way that I view men's work, it is actually okay to have some judgments. Like, we're always judging to some degree or another, right? And so when you mention a completely non-judgmental space, like, again, non-judgmentality as a virtue is beautiful and wonderful and will make your life enriched. But when you're actually in a men's workspace and you're meeting a man and you're in relationship with him, um, you can learn something about a man within just, a few minutes of meeting him, that man maybe has never even seen within himself. Like, this is the ways in which poker tells work. You can read people, and those sort of judgments or assumptions that people pick up are actually quite useful because they can help men see blind spots. And so in a men's workspace, I like to cultivate a culture where it's like, if, let's say, like, you're showing up every week and I'm like, man, I feel like, Hans, you're kind of holding back from us. And like, you have that same thought each week. Um, in a men's workspace, I would encourage someone to skillfully communicate, like, hey, like, Hans, like, a story that I make up about you is that you're holding back here. And like, a part of you is like, you have one foot in and one foot out and you're elsewhere. And I find that to be a very powerful way of communicating. And yet that is a judgment. Um, I'll pause because I think we should probably dialogue a little bit more about this. But then the last thing I'd say is, like, I think worth having a conversation around is, should men's workspaces be fundamentally nonviolent in terms of communications? Like, and again, I'm not suggesting that we're ever actively harming someone, but going back to the example I gave earlier, there can be real power in getting what you would say is like a harsh, loving truth. In Michael Taft, for instance, the meditation, one of my meditation teachers who I deeply admire, he's just so loving and tapped in and caring for the world and for his students. But then if you watch him and if you listen to his Dharma talks, you'll see every now and then he'll just be like, no, don't do that. You are focusing on the wrong thing. That's the wrong direction to go in.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yep.
Right. Like, that's not nonviolent communication. That's very direct, clear, like, let me cut through the bullshit. And I think I want that in my men's workspaces.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to very quickly close the curtain. 1 second.
Please. Yeah.
Let's see. This is a little bit better.
Because what time is it there?
Oh, it's it's 6:45 in the evening.
Oh yeah, but it's the sun must be setting. Yeah.
Well, it's pretty high still, but a few hours indeed it will set. I'm happy that you explained a little bit more, and I definitely agree that there's a possibility of spiritual bypassing to just no, these are my needs, and I'm just not going to listen to feedback. Basically, while feedback is for me super important, it's a core element of NVC. As I have learned it anyway, and there can be a bit of difference between teachers and even between continents of NVC. I think that the non-violent communication I've learned can be quite different from, for instance, US NVC. I've seen that because of attending international spaces. But yeah, so in the spaces that I am at or where I'm facilitating, there is definitely space. Not that what I mean with non-judgmental is that we don't necessarily believe the judgments as the judgments. Like, an opinion is an opinion, a perspective is a perspective, and we're going to go a little bit deeper to see what is my motivation to tell you my observation or my feedback. It doesn't mean that I don't also want to go to you. That's another, of course, entry point into evasive maneuvers. That's not what I mean. But it's more like to add a layer of nuance. It's more to hold our judgments a bit mindfully. And a beautiful example is what you just said. It's like, oh, I tell myself the story that this person is kind of faking it or whatever. And you can actually say, we will typically say, hey, can I just do a reality check with you? Or I'm having some judgment. I want to just check with you. So that's definitely there. And I do also want to acknowledge, I do see some kind of a gap, let's say. I do see that NVC is not, for me anyway, a complete system. And it can be, it can be a complete system for spiritual practice. I know people who just really, they are NVC and they are having deep practice with that. I like what you said earlier about the integral approach. And you mentioned some Ken Wilber stuff there without mentioning Ken Wilber. What I've learned is, what I'm still learning is Aletheia coaching, which you must have heard of, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm an Aletheia coach, and I also receive Aletheia coaching. What I love a lot about that, and I just got Steve March again to say yes to another recording in a few weeks' time. But it's this integral approach. And for me, what I noticed when I started coaching is that, I can really use my NVC stuff. But NVC in itself, while amazing and beautiful, is for me also not the complete package to hold space for somebody. So I think there may actually be a more agreement than I initially thought. But yeah, those are my first reflections. I'm curious, what comes to you when you hear that?
Yeah, well, and hearing that, actually, I'm reminded that, saying that example I gave, like a story I make up with you is that you're holding back. Like that actually is nonviolent communication in a sense, because you're using the I statements and you're acknowledging the story. And I agree with like everything that you're saying as far as the, like being mindful about holding your judgments and understanding that they're judgments like that again. And that goes back to sort of like I do think it's sort of stage dependent. And by that, I mean like stage of development, where people who are brand new to this sort of work, like I think they should be trained in nonviolent communication in a men's worker space, right? It's very useful. But then I think as one develops and that your judgments are just judgments and thoughts and projections that are a result of your own conditioning and other, forces outside of your awareness even, like then that's when I think it becomes incomplete. But maybe something that's sort of crystallizing for me is that I do think for people who are newer to this sort of stuff, it's foundational to learn about this, to communicate from an I statement.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it indeed, it's a very foundational practice to do NVC that so many people could do with, just to have this clarity, because what you're talking about also is ownership. I have a feeling, I have a need, that's why I'm talking to you, and this is what I want because this is what I see, and that's where I want to end up with you. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And something that also brings to mind is that, like, for a lot of men in particular, like, we've all heard about mansplaining, and like men it is, again, at a certain stage of development, it's very common for men to sort of just give advice and try to problem solve, right? And a classic example is like if your woman is talking about a fight that she's having with her girlfriend, and it's like, well, why don't you just invite her over and talk to her? Why don't you actually just tell her to do this? And that's not what she needs in that moment. Right?
Yeah.
Likely she just needs to be like, oh man, babe, that sounds hard. Like, what are you feeling? And again, and so if at the base level, getting trained and understanding that, like, being able to relate to people and empathize and support them, and just first have that level of just like from the heart, like I can be with you and feel what you're going through and have space for it and not just try to problem solve it. Super important. But then, and I even noticed this in some of the examples I gave, like, oh, like that sounds really hard. And I'm trained as a Hakomi practitioner, and like, it's like, there's ways in which, you can hear people weaponizing that, like, ooh, like that. I really feel that,
Yeah.
hand on the heart, and adjusting their tone of voice. And we see this a lot. And, I see this a lot in Bay Area kind of healing culture. And you see this in the psychedelic plant medicine healing culture a lot, and the spiritual scene. And it doesn't feel authentic. It feels performative. And it's like kind of mockable in a lot of ways, even though for your guy from the middle of America who's never been trained in that, like that stuff would be really useful. But it has, I think, yeah, in certain areas, it has a real shadow side.
Yeah. It can become just another mask, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about men's work in general, or NVC, or anything that you feel? Otherwise, I can move to another question. For me, it feels
Um,
pretty complete, but yeah, up to you.
yeah, I think, well, it's cool. I'm glad that, yeah, I think we have alignment. I mean, I think the thing that, I would also just say is like in a men's workspace, and I go back to that example I gave with like Michael Taft to just be like, stop doing that thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
think it's sometimes so there are many principles that I try to adhere to in the groups that I lead, but the two that I always come back to are love. And that one is actually, it's obvious, but it's actually the deepest, right? At the end of the day, we're here to support and love each other and to be better men. And it can be really easy to forget that and to go into like patterns of competitiveness and judgment. And so like that's paramount. But then the other is fire, right? Which is like in a men's group, like it's not a women's group. It's not a psychotherapy group. It's different than there are psychotherapy men's groups, but in the lineage of men's work that I'm sort of drawing on from, David Robert Bly to David Data to John Weiland. And again, there's a shadow side with all that stuff too, but at least there is a tradition there. And in those spaces, I think it can be really useful to have just that, like a warrior type of communication every now and then from someone you deeply admire to be like, Hans, I think you're scared,
Mm-hmm.
just to say it
Yeah.
and not beat around the bush. And so
Yeah.
that's the only other thing I think I would say is that for me, I find it really valuable when people bring that in. And for the guys that I actually that come to my groups, because most of them are pretty developed and are pretty good at like the first just relatability, they actually need more training to just say the things, speak the truth, to speak it efficiently without rambling and beating around the bush.
Yeah. I definitely think you did say it just now, and it was an example, but I think I am a little bit scared to say those things precisely because I've worked so hard to be careful from a very respectful place. And I also do want to say that for me, what Michael does is not incongruent with NVC. You may have heard this idea of the protective use of force, which is an NVC kind of wisdom as well. And it's basically for people that are maybe listening and don't know what it is. If you see a child about to walk under a bus, if the only route you have to stop it is to kick the child in the head, you kick the child. It's extreme example, but
Right.
protective use of force because you
Or
just saved
yell at
his
him.
life,
Right.
or
Yeah.
yell at
Yeah.
him. Of course, whatever minimum amount of force is does the job. And I would say working with Michael, especially when you do the deeper practices with energy work, it's actually very important that we are also protected from going down the wrong path. So if Michael says, don't do that, it is love. It is very respectful. It is, I would say, the protective use of force. Of course, he's not doing the protective, but it would fit really well in that paradigm. But yeah, the interesting thing is that listening to you and just reflecting on my 6 years of men's group, and it may be me, it may not be necessarily NVC or men's work with NVC flavor or something. I want to own that it could also be me. But I see that I first off want to say I really like our men. I'm not necessarily going to change anything. I love the connection. And you see that there's just a thirst for connection, especially among men.
Yeah.
I love that. I wouldn't want to change it. And I think I sometimes miss, and maybe that is for me a next step. So I like hearing that from you. Miss that we can have this respectful, careful place while not sacrificing what it's actually maybe cruel to withhold some truths, even if they can only come in a kind of judgment or like, hey, dude, I just think this is fucking bullshit. Can we
Yeah.
just not, right? And that
Yeah. Yeah.
you're not helping somebody by never saying that to
That's
them.
right.
And I think I may err sometimes on the side of not saying those things because I want to be careful. So yeah, it's
Right.
important.
Well, I can tell you're an empathetic, compassionate guy, and you care about. It seems like living by those values, and Me too. And I think for people who like also have been extensively trained, it's like we have to kind of almost, especially if you have any like sort of therapeutic or coaching training, you have to almost like like move against that, which is, a proper therapy is sort of like you're not giving opinions, you're sort of just helping unfold like the innate goodness of the client. And this is different. This is a different frame. And it's almost like that's why we're almost creating containers in which it's okay to say the thing really directly and for it to be wrong. Like, so a term that I use in my groups is like, we're like shooting shamanic arrows at each other. And I first got this from a guy, Jordan Bates, and I just love it because it's like,
I know Jordan
sometimes,
Bates.
Jordan?
Yeah, from High Existence.
Yes. Yeah. Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a men's work
Yeah.
guy. I went on his podcast and, like these shamanic arrows, like, so, you'll say something like, like Hans, I think you're holding back. When, and sometimes it's just going to like fly right on past or through you because you're just like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't land for me. But then other times it's like the arrow hits right and you're like, oof, that was what I needed to hear. Like when my mentor was like, you're scared of just doing the thing and you know what you want to do. It hits super deeply. And so we even create exercises where we're intentionally encouraging people to say the hard thing. Like you are a king because you're not a king because, and then just list and let it rip. And so like in those spaces, it's actually a safe space to own your projections because again, it's like back to that principle of like, sometimes your projections and judgments are carrying an insight about that man that he'll never see if without that type of exercise. And I also just love that like skillful use of force. I hadn't heard that with
protective
NBC. I
use
think
of
I
force.
was, I think I remember like reading about it in the book, but it's been some time.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I wanted to say a few things. One is that it's, I'm not trying to be kind of a, I'm trying not to be an NVC guy, if you know what I mean. It's an amazing modality, but it's not all of me. It's not my whole paradigm. I'm also
Right.
deeply into non-duality and all that stuff. But I just do want to say, because we're having this conversation, to kind of, advocate a little bit, or just make it clear for listeners, at least my view, is that it's still not nonviolent because you're stepping into the space where, hey, listen, we're going to shoot some shamanic arrows at each other. So I think the most important thing is choicefulness. If we do it choicefully, and then of course you can go, yeah, okay, well maybe sometimes it will not be choiceful. I do find that very important, especially when it can be sensitive, or when you just said you are or you work with trauma awareness. That's important, but then to do that willfully, then okay, come with the arrows. And I forgot the other thing I want to say. Maybe it comes later.
Well, that you just gave me some things to chew on there. And one, it's nice that we have more common ground than we thought. Because I remember when we first were chatting, we're like, oh, this is like there's a pretty big divergence. But it sounds like actually the way in which I'm describing it, maybe is nonviolent, or maybe fits the framework, or maybe is just aligned with your view. But you mentioned non-duality, and that's another passion point for me, and just like sort of took over my life for a few years, and still maybe perhaps. But in my view, in the non-dual reality, like it's not nonviolent, right? Like violence is part of life.
Yeah.
Like harsh speech and that's part of life too. And that's it's an interesting road to go down. Not to say that everything just because it exists means that you should bring it into your philosophy, but just to say that in a non-dual view, I think you would want to really, in my sense is like, you'd want to celebrate all of it from like a more tantric approach.
Yeah. Now I love that, and that's also kind of I remember what I wanted to say, and it is also kind of this inclusion that you're kind of alluding to, right? Like to be complete, like to have love and fire. And while we're talking, I'm trying to think about, okay, I like this, I want to do this, but then it comes to me that I can say very harsh, truths or opinions or whatever you want to call them. I might be a little bit careful with calling them truths, but like my view of you, I can say that very respectfully. like I say, Alex, I want to say something that may be a bit tough to hear. I think you need to hear it. Are you ready? Then
Yeah.
you can still say no, and then it's your choice. And okay, whatever, that's another choice to make. But then I say, hey, listen, I think blah 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 X, Y, and Z. I can say it, and I can still bring it. Hey, listen, this can be a little bit tough, but blah blah blah. So I just like
That's
that it can be
great.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me that something that I encourage my guys to do is like on days when they're feeling below the line or under resourced, I encourage them to say like, "Hey, today I'm not looking for fire," right? Or in some cases, someone might even ask like, "Are you open to some fire?" You
Yeah.
know, and so it
Yeah.
is good to check in because some days, like if you're really just, I have seen this happen in groups where I'll have like a founder who is just super stressed and burnt out and dealing with like a million things and lawsuits and will come in to group and basically describe something that's like really kind of confusing or sounds out of alignment to the guys. And so the guys will just jump, be like, hey, like this doesn't track, man. And that's not actually what that guy needs in that moment to sort of
Yeah.
be pointed to how he might be showing up out of alignment. What he needs is just rest or excuse me, a support, right? And more love. And so um yeah, like I think skillfulness and choice is huge because um it can fire can be destabilizing for
Yeah.
men when it's done at the right time in the same way that meditation and psychedelics and any psychotechnology can be destabilizing at the wrong time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm finding it very interesting conversation because it brings up a lot in me, and it shows me, yeah, again, what I can. I there's a yearning in me to go a little bit in that direction, while also wanting to hold on to, no, the skills I've cultivated, and I think it's possible. Yeah, so that's cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, and sort of the somatic therapist in me is curious to ask, like, what is it that feels scary about what is it that's scary about that? And where does that, come from? And I imagine you probably have some ideas around that. And we don't even have to get into that now, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yeah.
No, I think I can say it's just that coming from a bit of a violent childhood, I think that I fear conflict actually.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and that's scary for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
appreciate you. Yeah. Mentioning that. And I'm sorry that you had that
yeah,
upbringing. That's not fair for a child to be
yeah.
exposed to that.
It was shitty, but I'm also quite far along in healing that. I believe, but that doesn't mean that I don't still have stuff to process or patterns to evolve or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. And, I think, and a lot of this, I see men's work as a training ground to get better at conflict because conflict actually is something that we really as men can fear, particularly in romantic relationships. But you can learn that actually conflict is such a healthy, important part of it and like get better at it and get more comfortable with the discomfort of being in
yeah,
conflict. And that's another thing I really picked up from my mentor, Ben Gorski, which in particular around like romantic relationships, which is that a lot of men, when there is conflict, and this can be across heteronormative or non-heteronormative relationships, they view conflict as like, this means this is wrong. This is not a fit. I got to get out of this and I got to run. Right. That sort of avoidant pattern tends to be really common in men. And it's like just sort of getting some basics, psychoeducation that like conflict is actually okay and can be worked through and you can process using tools, I think is really, really useful.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Talk about fire, right? I have a friend who told me a while ago that he was quite proud that he had a partner for a very long time and they hadn't had a single argument. And I'm on the one hand like, oh yeah, that's nice, but I'm also like, is that something to really celebrate? Like, is that definitely a good thing? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe for him, it's the best thing, and that's what do I know? But I'm also not sure if that's necessarily by definition a good thing or something.
right, right. What are you avoiding in that case? I think it depends. Like, how long have they been together? How long do you
Yeah,
know?
some years, I believe.
Okay, so
Yeah,
yeah, in that case, I would say you probably are avoiding something. So if your friend's listening, that my words, not Hans's
don't do
words.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But like, what I'll say is like when I met my partner Grace, like I don't think we had conflict for the first several months. Like it was very like just good fit, and and then of course we did have conflict in some big conflict, but now we have conflict, normal conflict, but we always come out of it really well. And so like I have seen people, I think when there is just a really good match, like there can be no conflict for some time, but if there's no conflict for like years, that's probably not
Yeah.
a great sign.
Yeah, I think so too. And we're both aware enough to know we can't generalize and we don't know other people, but I tend to agree as well.
Yeah.
I want to check with you because you're very open. So there's a switch of topic if it's okay for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're quite open about, you just mentioned you were in AA, there was some addiction in your past. Is this
Uh-huh.
something you're kind of, okay, I don't need to talk about it anymore? Or is it something you're open to talk about a little bit?
Oh yeah. I mean, I write about it. I'm very open. It's
Yeah.
sharing about it has been a big part of my healing journey. I will say that like, it's been cool in recent years and months that like I'm getting to weave that in, talking about the things that I'm most passionate about, which are I think like are awakening and growth. And so for a while, like it was getting a little old to just like have to tell my story, but I love,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm an open book. Let it rip.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I wanted, by the way, I just want to make one little loop back to what we talked about earlier. You were talking about being with the discomfort of conflict. And I just wanted to uh, thank Alethea and thank my coach specifically, and not to name him necessarily, but because it's an ongoing process, but I'm learning so much more to be with discomfort, to be with difficult feeling is such, and also, by the way, Michael Teft's work with Vipassana and just being with body sensations. So it's just
Yeah.
so amazing. I'm in the middle of that. Um, but I guess then to switch to this topic, and I really wouldn't want you to kind of repeat a story you've told many times. What I think is an interesting question, because when I look at my own life, my own trauma, and my own shit, um, I continuously evolve my relationship to it, and I imagine that happens for you as well. So I'm
Uh-huh.
curious, thinking about your past and these things that happened. What would you say is your most recent shift in how you relate to it, how you understand it, or maybe your kind of learning edge around it? Could you share something like
Yeah.
that?
That's a great question. Well, the learning edge is I think perpetually, despite having done just, I mean, countless thousands of hours of work on it. I had to do treatment. I was doing secretive treatment because I was so petrified of the moral failing of what it meant to be an addict before I finally got sober, and then did years of psychotherapy and retreats and so I had to do a lot of work. And the thing that is, I think, a perpetual learning edge is like what was really going on there and causing it and leading to it. And of course, I can give you a lot of ideas. Like there was a fundamental wound of unworthiness and whatnot. But I have found that rather than like a single answer, it's more like stars in a constellation, and you sort of just continually map that. And so the learning edge there is just perpetually like curiosity around like what actually led to that, and what am I maybe avoiding within myself today that still might have been that might have been running the show then. And so that's something I'm always open to. But to really answer the heart of your question, which I love, is that the one way that I understand my addiction now, which I didn't even have like for the first several years of my recovery, which is that my addiction was a misdirected search for transcendence and spiritual awakening. Like I had in hindsight, like as a kid, I was always drawn to fantasy and Jedis and Harry Potter and Tolkien and this like otherworldliness of like magic. Um, and when I discovered drugs, that was my direct portal into that.
Mm.
And I think growing up in a society that lacked initiation for men, that lacked rites of passage, and sort of like hedonistic. This was the path that made sense, and my heroes were Huxley and Hunter S. Thompson, and guys who really pushed the edge. And I thought that was the most badass thing in the world. And so, but even so, like whenever I would, I would have these like very spiritual, mystical experiences on drugs and really push it far. But then I would also have like what glimpses or openings. Like there were a few times in particular that I really remember. One very vividly And because of my meaning making at that time, and this is I was in college, a freshman in college, I just interpreted that experience as like, oh, I need to come back here and get high
Mm.
because like the hills were calling me to get high because that's how I thought. Like it was all around drugs, and so and then the way in which like once I really escalated my drug use, like it was like mixing all sorts of drugs and running into the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is a very dangerous area. It's like the basically like the slum and living a double life of like pushing like of like on the one hand being this successful tech executive in Silicon Valley, executive, and on the other hand, this drug addict and sort of criminal um, doing illegal activity that could get me killed or in trouble. There was like a real mystical draw there, and so I and then when I first got sober and had hit my rock bottom moment where I really, at that point was in six figures of debt. I was in crazy withdrawal, excruciating with physical withdrawal. I couldn't, last for 20 minutes without entering withdrawal. And didn't then at that point was out of work and had a young marriage on the unraveling. Like that's when I had lost everything. And I finally surrendered and opened myself to something deeper. And I didn't realize it then, but like that was my first major shift, which has been like there's like a before and after moment from that. And so it wasn't until like the spiritual I developed spiritual maturity and continued on the spiritual path that I really understand, I think, what was actually happening there.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. That's sounds like a very intense period, and a little bit similar to what Michael shared. Just to make a little link to what he shared when he did like the far too strong LSD that he thought was normal LSD. Because I listened to the podcast with him a little bit, and at some point it was just too much, and it sounds like you have had similar experience, that it was just so intense to the degree that it actually did also bring an opening, a spiritual opening.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that and you're referencing when I had Michael on my podcast and he, basically surrendered at the super high dose of LSD and had like a breakthrough. And I mean, for me, it was different actually because that first time wasn't drug induced. I was sober, but I was just it was like a true humbling and I was so broken. I had lost everything. That's when something opened. It wasn't quite the same. Like it wasn't I think Michael just like that's sort of like like a proper sort of awakening shift, psychedelic induced that he had. For me, at the time, I wouldn't have been like, that was an awakening because, I was
Mm.
still in the gutter. But what happened in the days and months after that, even going through like a year long medically supervised detox and feeling like awful, every day, like there was just this like felt sense of like, it will never be as bad as it was. It will never be what it was when I was like a crazy man and with drugs and withdrawal and there was like a sense of things just being okay.
Mm.
Like, and I could make it through everything or I could even die and it would never be as bad as that. And so that's how more it manifested for me. So you could say that maybe it was like more gradual. But then I've also, having trained and worked in the psychedelic space, particularly with ayahuasca, I have had moments like Michael describes, like going to sort of a psychotic hell realm in psychedelics that have been some of the most instructive periods for me. I don't know if I handled it as well as he did, though.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Who
yeah,
can tell? It
yeah.
it sounds a little bit like I'm sure you're aware of the framework called feeding your demons.
Yes,
And that's literally what he described. Okay, demons eat my soul. You describing hell realms and kind of surrendering to. Well, that's not what you described necessarily. But have you done any work with that, by the way? Feeding your demons. Have you done that type of
that's
work?
a Tibetan practice, right? Is that even
Yeah, yeah,
Chode based?
yeah. Chud based.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a funny synchronicity because I one of my teachers and or mentors is just putting out some work around chode, and I've been digging into it. I can't say that I have like explicitly done Tibetan style feeding your demons practice, but I have in certain meditations. Like I think Michael has guided that before, and just I worked in the plant medicine, ayahuasca space. So it's like I
Yeah.
think I've had my share of exposure to demons and
Yeah.
whatnot, and I think I've had enough.
Yeah. Yeah. You've had
Not
your share of demons.
I've had my share, yeah, of like psychedelic demons at least. Like the endlessly rich path, like tantric path or non-dual path of turning towards the pain, the thing, the fear, like that is always alive for me. But when it comes to the more overt, like I need to go into my shadow and I need to do psychedelics to heal my, like that feels like that has mostly run its course for me. Not to say that I still don't want to do work like that, but um, that was unexpected too, having
Mm.
worked in the um, psychedelic space and having that been so instructive. We haven't even talked about, but that was a major. When I was a year sober, I was at a real turning point in my spiritual path, and feel like I hit a limit with AA and decided to do ayahuasca for the first time. And at that point, I was also really thinking, I was like, okay, I know I couldn't do the hard drugs again. Like
Yeah.
that had been that permanent shift, but I was like, I think I can drink and smoke weed again because I was a huge pothead and drinker, and I did ayahuasca, and that forever changed that. And
Yeah.
it was just yeah, and it had been so valuable for me, and I've seen how valuable it, and I still do some of my men's retreats. We do psychedelic journeys, mushrooms typically, but
Yeah.
sometimes we work with heart openers. And so I'm a big believer in this work, and I even do some psychedelic intensive work with the right sort of people, because I have a lot of experience in that area. But my own personal sort of like drive for it has definitely faded as non-duality and meditation have become more front and center.
Yeah. Yeah, again, another synchronicity because indeed, yeah, I did do a course in Feeding Your Demons. I happened to be too busy at the time, so I kind of half-assed it. I can't really say I did it, but I did do it. You know what I mean? I also did drink ayahuasca for yeah, a fair amount of cups, extremely intense. So I can vouch for that. And you also have yourself a psychedelic healing program. Is that based on your experiences? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so that's Natura Care, and Natura Care is a nonprofit program that I co-founded with Selena De Leon and Todd Youngs, and so this basically is taking a long-term approach to working with people suffering from addiction, and we instruct them in contemplative practice, meditation, spiritual practice, spiritual care, and then prepare them basically to go on retreat in Costa Rica where they'll be immersed in nature, cleansing with very healthy, healing food, and and work with preparing them to ingest the medicine through a series of ceremonies, and then do a long integration on the back end of that. And so it's a long term spiritual care program for folks struggling with addiction, and um, it's beautiful work that that can help a lot of folks, a real range of folks. Like there's people who have tried a lot to get sober. Like they maybe been through treatment, they maybe tried other psychedelics, and they haven't had this sort of proper this approach before, which is like really bringing in the indigenous wisdom and healing modalities with the best that modernity and recovery has to offer. And then there's others who, are like veterans who have, PTSD. And then there's people who actually might have a lot of recovery under their belt, but they haven't actually done a psychedelic. And for people in recovery in the old paradigm in which I came up in, it was like considered still to be taboo to do, and maybe even breaking your sobriety. And so with some cases, we'll have people who want to have their first psychedelic experience as a way to enhance and grow their recovery. And then everything else, in between. And so, yeah, it's really beautiful, powerful work. And my colleagues are just are people I just deeply admire. Like Todd Youngs he's sort of like a legend in the 12-step and psychedelic world, where bridging those two together, actually using psychedelics intentionally as a means to spiritually open to the beauty and power of the 12 steps and recovery. And he has a really inspirational story, and is a lot of sort of elder wisdom. And then Selena is just a beyond talented spiritual leader, ayahuasquera, and sort of badass. And so I feel like really we're lucky to have been partnered with them and the team that we have, because the work is it's quite meaningful. And so
Yeah,
yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, you do so many amazing things. I mean, I just took one paragraph of your bio, but there's like a whole page of it. But the website is, of course, in the description. What's on the horizon for you? What are you looking forward to in the next, let's say, 2 years or something like that?
Mm. That's an interesting question. The first thing comes up for me is not much, because, as you know, a sort of, spiritual practice, like it's like harder to extrapolate from the present than it used to be. Um, I mean, the thing that is also exciting, I think I was sharing a little bit with you about this, is that I recently wrote a piece that has really taken off and gone viral, and it was basically trying to distill my core thesis around addiction. So I've been writing about addiction for many years, as a way to, sort of help my own healing process. And then also to sort of help people understand that, like, addiction isn't just the people who are huddled up on the street or in church basements and AA meetings, but is really everyone in today's society, particularly with digital technology, and trying to have people understand that, like, if this is something that impacts us all today, yeah, we could all really benefit from adhering to some of the principles of recovery, which are about, accountability and growth and change. And I basically I wrote this, and how, like, for my own journey, started with the gross drugs of opiates, amphetamines, and benzos, alcohol, and then eventually went down to, like, the more subtler, socially sanctioned drugs that are okay. Like, I used to read the New York Times politics section cover to cover, and Pornhub, and Twitter, and I
Pornhub, what's
realized
that? I'm
what.
joking.
Oh yeah, I was like, really? They don't have that over there. And then eventually, like, I noticed that it was thinking patterns themselves, which is really what the spiritual traditions have been pointing to for millennia. That, like, you can free yourself from the compulsivity of your thinking mind and discover what's been living you all along. And the key word is compulsivity. So it's not about thinking being bad, but just compulsively overthinking, lost in thought, and um, sort of bridging. Basically, my kind of work bridges somatic psychology, which is what my training, and then contemplative practice, spiritual practice, and recovery, to sort of help people break free from overthinking. And that has been going really well, and there's a lot of exciting momentum there. And so I'm trying to pay attention to that. And I've been hosting and teaching workshops on it, and working on, like, subsequent follow-up essays. And so that's something that I'm excited about. I have no idea where it's going to go, but it's cool, because that actually, I mean, even just describing Natura Care and sort of men's work, it really is a synthesis of everything that, and non-duality, it's a synthesis of everything that I've been working on for the last so many years. And one of the things that's with my work, Hans, is, like, I've been trying to talk about this for a long time, and people would resonate with my writing. I've always had, engaged readers, but not at this level where it feels like people are really seeing themselves in it. And I think, like, I've one, probably gotten a little bit better. Like, I think as a writer, like, I'm less concerned about trying to sound literary, and just more about communicating the ideas efficiently and effectively. But I think also, in our world that we live in today, like global wars, everyone feeling hooked on their phone, like, more so than previously. And then now the AI revolution, I think people are starting to really wake up to the fact that, like, there's something fundamentally compulsive about the way we live. And addiction is one of the organizing forces of modern society. And, like, this can't continue. Right. And so I see the work of sort of overcoming our own addictions, whether that's thought or phone, or anything that's distracting you from the glory of the present moment, I see that work as vitally important. And, there's a lot in our world that is in sort of dire need right now. And I think that my particular like thread of dharma and the greater tapestry of dharma is to really help people recognize that like it starts with you, and everything is sort of downstream from that. Like you could even argue that all these wars of ideas and wars of people is downstream from the wars that we create in our own psyche. And so, yeah, I think this goes back to maybe where we started the conversation too, is just something that's been clear for me is like, I used to think that my work was maybe a little bit more collective, like cultural. And now I see it as more actually helping people sort of end their own civil war.
Mhm. Yeah, nicely put. And thinking about the future, bit of a different question, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
Are you going to go to, if there's a December retreat in Mount Madonna?
Oh, good question. I would love to talk to you. You want to talk to Grace, my partner, about that? If she'll she'll watch
Sure.
our
Yeah.
set. I, I've been to several of Michael's retreats. I've been to the one of the Mount Madonna ones, the December one. This must have been 4 years ago, I think now. And it is awesome. It's just, I really recommend it for folks, anyone listening. I don't know if I'll be able to make it. I've been trying to do his local ones that are like weekend ones. I try to go to the Thursday night sits when I can, but it's hard, man. I mean, you know how it is. It's hard to get the time, and it's also hard, particularly hard for me to attend retreats these days because the time that I do get for travel is like usually for the retreats that I'm leading, and so
Yeah.
just mindful of like not having too much time away from parenting and leaving Grace, solo parenting with grandma. But I would, if you gonna go?
I'm really planning to, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think a case could be made, and I would love to. I would love it.
Yeah.
It's just a great venue, and I love the way Michael runs retreats. I love his teachings. I mean, he's sort of, yeah. There's just, yeah. As far as we talk about men's work and masculinity, and I've actually have joked about this before with him at the Olympic, but I just think he's like a really ideal model of masculinity, like
Yeah.
powerful,
Yeah.
loving, funny.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. But yeah, I love that guy. And he's supposed to come on my podcast as well, but it's a bit in the future. But talk
Nice.
about your own retreats. Yeah. I'm going to publish this probably pretty quickly, like tomorrow or something. I know you have a retreat coming up pretty soon, I think. You want to share a
Oh,
bit about
oh,
that?
great. If you're going to
Yeah.
publish tomorrow, that's great. Yeah. So I have a retreat coming up in the first weekend of June, and that's in upstate New York, and that's with Steve Schlafman and Jeff Greenberg, folks that I've been collaborating with, great guys, and that is a great like intro to men's work retreat. And it's a beautiful venue upstate, and we'll have meditation, embodiment, healthy food, saunas. It's just an excellent time. And so, for anyone who is listening, we only have, I think, 1 or 2 spots left. But if anyone's listening and can hit me up right away, feel free to do so. And then yeah, I have my men's group, the Sons of Now. We call it Sons for short, and we do weekly groups, bi-weekly groups. So for people who can, and we meet with people internationally, and so for folks who can make the time slot work, would encourage people to check that out. And then we also have a retreat coming up in September. Those are for people who are members of the groups, but you can learn more about those retreats there on the sonsofnow.com website. And then for people who are local in the Bay Area, I have Dharma Brothers at the Olympic, which is just the men's work group that we meet there, and that happens about once every 6 weeks. And so I should have my next date there shortly.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll link it into the description. So thank you for that. I just want to give you the last word. So maybe especially somehow the theme is a lot about men. What do you want to just say as the last message for any men listening?
Yeah, I would say that right now we're living in a time where there is a lot of conversation about this crisis in masculinity. And I think it's safe to say that there is a crisis in masculinity. We see this coming out of the manosphere. We see the wreckage of the Epstein files. There's a lot of women right now, particularly in the new age and consciousness space, talking about how they don't trust men. And there's a real trust crisis happening with men. And that is not the full story, right? Today, there's also never been a better time to be a man who's committed to his own evolution, because you can actually work on these things and we become men who are trustworthy and powerful and not shying away from our power, even though that can be, there's sort of like two default moves that you might make in response to this collective crisis that we're in, which is one, you like get that macho, I'm just going to be powerful. And then two, you're sort of just apologizing for your existence, where it's like, oh no, like, yeah, we're so sorry. Everything we've done is wrong. When there's a third way, which is to be trustworthy, to care about women, to prioritize those who have lesser means, um, to be stewards of the planet and evolution, and to also, yeah, to like to carry your power and to hold that with confidence and the dignity that it deserves. And so I'd say for men listening, you know, we need you. And joining a men's group, being like, I'm a big believer in groups that are, one, consistent and paid for the just unlock of accountability, where it's like, I'm showing up here each week, I'm dedicating myself to it, because it's different from just when you can just drop in and out of a group, but really committing yourself to a space where you can sharpen your sword, so to speak, and open your heart with the same group of guys over time. Like that's a beautiful thing. And I just like, especially if I'm assuming, Hans, like your listeners, like they're meditators, they're into consciousness, and it's if you're into all that stuff, it's a great modality to catch your blind spots, ensure you're not spiritual bypassing. And because at the end of the day, you can do all the waking up, spiritual awakening that you want, but like, it's all about relationships. Like like how you show up in relationship, that is life. And so, I'm a big believer in the men's work movement. It has its shadow sides, but at its best, I think, is helping heal the culture. And so, and, the last thing I'll say, and this is just for any listener, is just that, it, this, if anything that we've talked about calls to you, just I would encourage you to follow it, because things can get so much better than you might imagine that they are. And I know this as someone who used to be in just immense pain and suffering. And so that was longer for a closing, but I'll leave it there. Thank you, Hans.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And this is just amazing. Thanks so much for your time, Alex. And yeah, that's a wrap.
Thanks, Hans.